This is the Garden of English. I'm Tim Freitas, and it's about time we start looking at how to write thesis statements for synthesis. So we're going to do that today. As we begin this video for synthesis thesis statements, I want to give a shout out to ParlayIdeas.com, particularly because they're sponsoring this video, and I really enjoy what they have to offer in my classroom and how customizable it is. So before we start talking about synthesis thesis statements in and of themselves, I want to just give a quick little demonstration about one of the ways that you can use Parlay that's not one of the ways that's always advertised. This comes from my World Lit and Grammar class, and what happened is my students were writing a major paper, and you're going to notice that I actually created what's called a roundtable, and this is just an online roundtable, which is meant to be an online discussion. And I created my own tasks for them to do, and I said, here's your task, here's what we're doing in class, here's your task, here's what your peer feedback instructions are. And I actually use this to house and monitor all of my peer editing. And I will give kids checklists, and I tell them to do things, and it puts them in conversation with one another. And I can actually just look at how all of this functions in one spot. And actually, Parlay gives us a lot of data that we can mine through too, but we'll look at that at a different time. But you're going to notice I gave my kids the task to just put their intro paragraphs about tyranny in their initial responses. So they all respond to this particular prompt with their intro paragraphs. And then they have to comment on two of their peers' intro paragraphs. And when they did that, I created a checklist of what the students had to do. And they had to either talk about what was engaging, provide more context, rewrite thesis statements. So they're interacting to make each other's intro paragraphs actually better, and they're all housed in one spot. And what's really nice is you'll notice that Florence Nightingale is one of my students, and clearly Florence Nightingale is not literally someone in my class. And what I really appreciate about this is that my students only see historical names, so unless they're communicating with one another, they don't know whose stuff is whose. And because of that, you're not going to see students just chasing down their friends to interact with one another. And so now, just a quick little demonstration of what this looks like here. I had a student who actually put in an intro paragraph here that was supposed to go through the first three moves of the classical argument structure. And then we have comments, and then these would be the comments that are right here. And I can just check these out, and I could say, okay, here's the initial assignment. Here are the comments. I can evaluate those comments and know that they're interacting with one another. And this creates, once again, that conversation that about peer editing that's actually kind of blind peer editing. And it's engaging. It's engaging for the classroom, and it was super helpful in getting the kids to produce better intro paragraphs as they had to revisit what they did and actually offer suggestions for other students' works. And I had all of their checklists right here. They could consistently go back to it right online. So please consider checking out Parlay. And once again, they are sponsoring this video, and we are grateful to them for that because they are indeed partnering with us to help the garden grow. And we look forward to continuing work with them. Anyway, we have been talking about the horror prompt, and we've had a couple videos about this. We talked about breaking down the prompt. We talked about ways to get sources in conversation with one another, or to read sources to see what they're about, to begin to set them up for conversation. But we do eventually have to write thesis statements. And sure enough, we've got our prompt here. And I'm only going to actually read the assignment part today. I'm not going to read this kind of background information because if you want me to do that, you can check out the other videos that we have for this that are probably right up here in the corner. But you're going to notice that the assignment tells us, or we need a little reminder, because the assignment part here is important for us to make sure that we answer the prompt, because that's, of course, what AP stands for. As always, it's not agony and pain or anxiety and pressure. It's answer the prompt. So we need to answer what we're told to do. So the assignment says to write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of the sources and develops your position on how commercializing fear and horror affects the ways individuals respond to the unknown and the macabre. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. But you're going to notice that right down here in the directions, I did highlight something here today. And that's where it says make sure that your argument is central. And the reason why is because you're going to notice that some of my thesis statements, you might say, I don't feel like that's actually answering the prompt. And the truth is that it is answering the prompt, but it's answering the prompt with my argument at the center. So I'm not just repeating the prompt. I'm actually creating an argument that does answer the prompt and actually has my own argument as its central focus. So please note that if you ever think any of these thesis statements are not answering the prompt, they are. My argument is just what's central, and that's why it looks a little different, because a lot of times when you answer a prompt, or when you've been taught to in the past, you're told to kind of repeat the prompt. And although we might want to take some language from the prompt, we want to make sure that we have an argument about it that will answer it and still be our own argument that we go through. Okay. So anyway, what we realized from the last video about breaking down the prompt is that we had some questions that we would have to answer in our thesis statements. Okay. And those questions come straight from where it says develop your position all the way through the macabre here. And we said, okay, what can't we know? And the questions that we came up with are, what effect does horror-based entertainment have on an individual's response to the unknown and the macabre? Okay. What are the ways individuals respond to the unknown and the macabre? And then what is my position about this relationship? And this last one might actually be naturally implied. Sometimes the position might be straight up articulated, but we need to realize that our answers have to, our thesis has to in some way answer all three of these questions. So that's what we're going to do. So what I did down here is I actually have 5 templates for thesis statements, and they get more complex as they go through. And some of these thesis statements are closed and some of them are open. And I actually have a 6th one as well. Now you'll notice that these thesis statement templates are extremely similar to the ones from my argument prompt. And the reason why is because synthesis is just argument with sources. But I did add a 6th one here today. And the reason why is because sometimes synthesis prompts are worded a little bit differently on the AP exam because they talk about issues and factors. And although I don't think that you'll see one of those types of prompts again, you never know. And I do have a thesis template for that. And the new stable prompt wording that's in the course and exam description still does allow for a factors or issues type of prompt. So I just wanted to put one in here as an example just to play it safe. You'll also notice that in my little chart here, where I have generated thesis in response to this particular prompt, I have 2 columns on the right-hand side. I've got my middle column and I've got my fully right-handed column. And that's because although I don't love horror films and I don't like horror-based entertainment, right? Some of you do, and I don't want y'all to think that I'm that big of a jerk, okay? So I wrote thesis statements that actually answer these questions, that respond to this prompt, pro and con, I guess. And I'm the middle column myself, but if you watch my last video with my friend Holly, she loves horror films, right? So maybe the right-hand side would be very similar to kind of her arguments here, okay? But anyway, so what we're doing is we are developing a position on how commercializing fear and horror affects how individuals respond to this kind of, the unknown and the macabre in life, and those kind of mysterious elements of life. And so those are the questions that we have to answer. So if you look at my first template here, this is a closed template. So what that means is that I'm going to be limited in what I'm actually going to talk about in my paper. You're going to notice my argument is that commercializing fear and horror negatively influences human responses to the unknown and the macabre. So there we go. How does it affect humans as they, get to know these things? It's a negative influence. There you have it. And then we have because such media desensitizes individuals to troubling content and normalizes culturally inappropriate gender norms. And so now you can actually see exactly where my paper is going. I'm going to start with desensitization and why that's a negative influence from commercializing fear. And then I'm going to actually talk about inappropriate actions, particularly in relation to gender norms, and why that is a negative kind of influence due to commercializing fear. And so you'll notice that that's not necessarily the unknown or the macabre, but, we still want to just be able to say, hey, look at, primarily speaking, even though we're talking about gender norms here, there is some sort of, exploration that we do into those things. So we could totally tie that in. This is a strong argument, and it's going to be guided right there. We're going to start with desensitizing individuals to troubling content like violence in the paranormal, and then we'll finish up with this idea of, normalizing inappropriate gender norms. And then I can write that paper, and it's going to follow that line of reasoning. And we're always going to tie that back to how that's a negative influence on human responses to exploring things that are unknown or mysterious to them. Okay. If we look at number 2, this is actually more open. I am more free to go in multiple directions. I can go in the same directions that template 1 actually has, but you'll notice that I have here a much clearer argument. So although here it talks, it's very clear that I don't love horror films, this one, my argument is central. It says individuals shouldn't engage with commercialized fear and horror-based entertainment. Now you might say that doesn't answer the prompt. Well, that's okay, because my argument is central here. But notice that I then put because such media negatively influences human responses to the unknown and the macabre. And so now we are answering the prompt, right? If we need to actually articulate how the fear-based entertainment influences how individuals act to the unknown and macabre, I have that right here, right? It's a negative response. And then I have my own argument, which is, and therefore individuals should not actually engage with this. And now because of that, you're going to notice that I actually have a strong argument here that does answer the prompt. It's also my own argument. So this is my own, and no one's going to think that I'm just going to be summarizing sources. Let's go down to template 3 here. And you're going to notice that template 3, it invites us to have a concession, some sort of concession language or counter argument language. When you concede, you say, yeah, this is right. When you actually produce a counter argument, you're going to say, some people might think this, but I'm going to prove it wrong. Okay. So you're going to have concession language, and then you're going to have your concession. And concession language is like although, though, even though, while, since, things like that. And then you're going to put your concession there or your counter argument there. And then you're going to make your claim. But notice that we don't have a because in this template. So this one's going to be nice and open. So I have, although it's natural to be intrigued by the unknown, and commercialized horror-based entertainment seems like a safe way to satisfy that intrigue, the greater negative psychological impacts that individuals develop from consistently consuming such entertainment should make them wary of exploring the more mysterious elements of life through the genre. And there we have it. I mean, this is a strong argument here where I address that, hey, this intrigue is natural, but maybe this isn't the best way to explore it. Notice that I did put the word greater here. And the reason why this word is highlighted in blue is because if I didn't have this word greater here, this thesis might actually seem like it equivocates. That means that it doesn't commit to one side or the other. But by putting the word greater there, you'll notice that my argument is much more clear that this genre of film and whatnot, or any type of media, is not the most healthy way to explore because of the negative impact that it has on humans, the negative psychological impact. Now, notice though, if we just jump over to the positive one here, we'll do a pro for those of you that are horror fans, right? We have, although it's documented that horror-based entertainment may have negative effects on psychological health, and therefore some suggest the genre should be avoided, commercialized fear-focused media actually provides the individuals with safe ways to explore their natural instincts that draw them towards understanding the unknown, while simultaneously allowing them to build stronger social and individual bonds. This word actually here, okay, right there, allows us to once again not equivocate. And because of that, we want to make sure that if we have a thesis that might seem like it could kind of waver on each side, like, hey, both are right, we don't want that. We need to put at least one word in there that's going to make sure that your perspective is more clear than the other one. And so because of that, okay, these are examples of concessions. Okay, we concede that this is true, but we're going to argue that. Okay, template 4 is a closed thesis here. We're going to deal with our concession and our counter argument. We're going to put that language up top. We're going to put our claim there. And notice that the difference between template 3 and template 4 is that we put this word because in here, and we have a unifying idea or reason. And this is going to kind of close things off just a little bit. So you'll see how this looks. While it's natural to be intrigued by the more mysterious elements of life, individuals shouldn't engage with commercialized fear and horror-based entertainment because such media desensitizes individuals to troubling content and normalizes culturally inappropriate gender norms. And you'll notice that you'll be like, wow, I feel like you've read that thesis before. And of course I have, because all I'm doing is I'm building on my templates here to make them more complex. Now, that doesn't mean that this first one is not complex. It is. And how do I know it's complex? Because the word because is in it. And because is a subordinating conjunction. And if you have a sentence that contains a subordinating conjunction, it's at the base a complex sentence if it's written well. So because of that, this can indeed be complex, but this is for the person who wants to just say, here's my argument, and I don't want to recognize the other side, and I want to write a complex argument where I talk about only my position. You can do that, and that can still be sophisticated, right? But you can also move up here, and you can notice that as I add some layers of concession or counter argument, things become even more complex and compound, and because of that, the argument's going to be much more nuanced. And so that's what's going on here, okay? So template 4 has this word because here, and you'll notice that what comes after it is the kind of scope of my essay. I'm going to talk about desensitizing individuals to troubling content such as violence and the paranormal. And I'm going to talk about how it normalizes inappropriate gender norms, which would potentially normalize inappropriate behavior around these kind of things that we still ask questions about. So, and all of that then suggests maybe this isn't the best way to kind of explore these things that we want to naturally explore. Okay. And once again, you can look on the right-hand side and see the positive spin on the horror films for this as well. I want you all to know that I empathize with both sides. It's not a problem. Okay. And then we have number 5 here. And this one is very similar to number 4, which deals with but it starts with the word since. It has a concession. It has the word however. So we've got a conjunctive adverb there with a semicolon. So we've got a nice, really, really compound, complex sentence there. And we've got the word because as well. So there's coordination, there's subordination, and you guys can access this document down below and check out what that sentence looks like. But this will also guide an essay. And my essay will just go through these particular moves that you see in the thesis. So I would anticipate that this essay for thesis number 1 would probably be a little bit shorter than this essay for thesis number 5, but I can't prove that. But thesis 5 here, this guides a whole paper where I have to really deal with a concession and then really deal with my reasoning for my argument incredibly thoroughly. I can't just say, here's my argument only. I have to actually deal with the concessions and counter arguments as well, just based on the setup of this template. Now, the last thing that I want to cover here today, as we look at this, is just the idea of what is a factors or issues prompt. In past AP exams, they have had excellent prompts that deal with factors and issues. I think about the locavore prompt, which happens to be one of my favorites. That actually shows up in my original Argue Ideas, Not Things video. You can access that here. And I also think about the space exploration prompt, which talks about factors and issues. And there's also one about educational resources, like technology-based educational resources. That's a factors and issues prompt. They're excellent prompts to use. I don't think that you should not consider them in your classroom or consider them for practice, okay? And although a lot of people think that those prompts are now done away with, the truth is that we can't prove that because the new stable prompt language that was released in the course and exam description does allow for that. So I have rewritten my prompt a little bit so that it looks like a factors and issues prompt, just so that you can see how this template works. But imagine we had that same beginning, and then it tells us to write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 sources that develops your position on what issues are most important for an individual to consider when making decisions about engaging with horror-based entertainment. So pretend that was our prompt. I've got this little template here for a prompt like that. And it says, when discussing, put the topic of the essay in there, issue or factor 1 that should be considered, issue or factor 2 that should be considered, and issue and factor 3 are important to consider because, and then you give your unifying reasons based on either human nature, politics, economics, efficiency, things like that. Please note that you don't need to have 3 issues. You can have 2, you can have 1. It doesn't matter. You could have 4 listed out there if you wanted to. It depends on the paper that you want to write. I just put 3 there for the sake of being able to produce 3 body paragraphs in a time setting. But if you notice, here's how this actually looks on this side. Okay, you will still see that I have a position in my own argument about horror-based entertainment. But here's what it looks like. It says, when discussing personal engagement with horror-based entertainment, the media's social value, intrinsically violent nature, and cognitive developmental impact are important to consider because, though enjoying such forms of entertainment may be emotionally invigorating, embracing the genre seems to have an overall negative influence on the human psyche. And so this right here is a nice complex way for me to enter into and produce a thesis for a strong synthesis paper that's going to pull from the sources that we do indeed have access to in the packet, in this horror-based packet, which will also be linked right down below, but you can find it in the other videos that we had coming before this. So anyway, these are the thesis templates that I have. If you don't ever want to use a template, by the way, that is totally fine. And then here, right here, or should I say right here at the bottom, is language of how you can do that. You don't necessarily need to use these templates, but having this type of language in your thesis is good because it's going to turn your thesis statement either into a compound sentence, a complex sentence, or a compound complex sentence. And if you want to write a complex argument and a nuanced argument, you're going to want to have, or a compound argument, right? A layered argument, you're going to want to have a thesis that actually has those elements in it. And so because of that, you really want to try to put at least one of these words in your thesis statement. Not more, don't go overboard here, but you want at least one to kind of help you start driving that point home. So if this video was helpful to you, I ask that you help us by doing exactly the easiest thing that I could think of, and that is just by clicking like and subscribe. So please take care of that, right? I'd like to point out that the Garden of English is trying to grow even more. So we have started by starting to get some Patreon supporters so that we can actually try to pull in some new merch images and keep the content flowing for free. We are trying to keep this free as well. So we ask that you consider supporting us on Patreon. We're thankful for those that do. Once again, we're thankful for Parlay Ideas for sponsoring this video as well. We look forward to continued partnership with them. The Garden of English is active on Facebook and other elements of social media, so follow us there. You can follow us on Instagram. You can even check us out on TikTok and Pinterest as well. We're going to come back with ways to write body paragraphs and topic sentences and outline papers and conclusions. We're also going to have a video about, common mistakes of integrating sources in synthesis papers as well. So look forward to that over the next few weeks, and I look forward to seeing you when I make those videos. Have a great one.